Hey everyone, welcome to how to paint a fall floral bouquet. I'm starting this painting off with painting the jar that you see in the painting. And I'm using a light pinky peach wash for this. I thought it would be a nice color for fall, and it's light, kind of indicating those tinted mason jars that are pretty popular right now. So I'm just starting with the shape of it. You can't see really on the film, but I did sketch a light sketch of the shape out, and then I indicated with some wet on dry lines the screw on area of the top, and now I'm going around the perimeter and just doing the edges. And I am doing this wet on dry, but I have really watery wet paint, and then I'm quickly blending out the edges. If you are not confident with that method, you could also do wet on wet, so a wash of clean water first and then add in the paint. But this way is quicker, and I get a concentrated, more of a concentrated wash on the first go. So I'm just filling in the center now, again keeping it nice and light and translucent looking. And I'm using a number 6 round sable brush. This is one of my favorite brushes to use. It's by Raphael, and I think they're not super easy to find in Canada and the US. I actually order mine from the UK. And those are just the brushes I like. They hold a lot of water and have a really nice fine point. So now I've got the first layer on, and I'm taking more watery wet peachy pink and just darkening some of the areas that I think need a little bit more color. And then again, just sort of blending it out. I'm actually pulling a bit of the color down with my brush here from just the bottom of the rim of the jar. Now I'm drying the jar so that I can start on the floral portion, so make sure the jar is dry first. And I'm starting with the centers of the Rudibeckia, and I'm using a dark brown mix here. And again, this is wet on dry, and I'm leaving some white spots in the centers, and I've got a circle that's going to be sort of a head-on, straight-on view, and then some little ovals that'll be more of a side view for the flowers. And once I have those painted in, I'm just sort of adjusting, adding in a little bit more of the darker color in some areas. And I also really want to make sure that the edges are not uniform, and that kind of just indicates the texture of all of the little stamens that would be in the center of the flower. Now I've started on the petals. I'm using a golden yellow, and I'm using the tip and then pressing down with the belly of the brush and then lifting up. And that's how you get these nice tapered petal shapes that are perfect for the Rudibeckia flower. Sometimes I think it's also called a brown-eyed Susan. And I've started with the front on angle flower, and I've evenly placed some petals. And once I've got a few evenly placed all around the flower, then I'm going in and creating some more petals to create more fullness and even out the spanning and spacing of the remaining petals. And it's important to try and just get a nice amount of concentrated paint and then create the petal with as few strokes as possible. The least amount of time you can go in and back in and fiddle with things, the better. So I've been focusing a lot on trying to create the botanical or floral look that I want to create with as little strokes and fiddling as possible lately, and I've actually been really happy with the results. So now I'm working on the other flower, and I've just sort of curved some of the petals down to indicate that they're sort of drooping on that side view. Again, same thing though, using the tip of my brush, pushing down on the belly and then lifting up at the end to create that petal shape. You can see me doing that again here. And sometimes if you don't get it, you can kind of quickly go back in and get a little bit more of the shape. But once it starts to dry, you might make a bit of a blob if you put your brush back in. Now that I've got the petals in, I'm starting on a few of the leaves using the same brush and a darker mix of green. I am just making the basic leaf shape and then going around the edge and pulling out some of that color to indicate the scallops on the edge of the Rudibeckia leaf that you do see. And it's important to do that while the leaf is still quite wet. So I would do one leaf at a time and then do the edges right away. If you do a few leaves and then go back to do the edges, it won't work as well. And adding in another leaf here, I'm not too worried about some things overlapping. It's kind of the style of this painting and the beauty of the transparency of watercolor. And so I've got a lighter leaf, and again I'm doing the scalloped edges, and I really do want to make sure that I have some darker leaves and lighter leaves, so I've just rinsed my brush a little from the first leaf and then painted another one. And I may have a little bit of a watermark there, so I've just tried to even it out a bit. You can leave it if you'd like. Again, the less fiddling the better. And I am using sort of the rule of 3 for painting this. I did do like a really rough sketch on a piece of paper first to see how I wanted to lay things out. And 3s and uneven numbers look really good together. So I've done the 3 flowers, and now I added in 3 leaves, and I did decide that I do want to add another leaf in, but it'll kind of get evened out with the smaller flowers and botanicals that I add in after. So just finishing up the 3rd leaf. I'm going to leave it like that. Now I'm adding in the stems. I've switched to a smaller brush. It's a round sable number 1 brush, and this is the brush I go to mostly for creating the stems, and this is wet on dry that I've done. So just a nice wet mix of the green paint, and then on dry paper I drag down the stems, and the lighter the pressure you use, the thinner and more delicate of a line that you'll get. And once that's done, I'm just letting them dry, and now I've got my mechanical pencil and I'm really lightly mapping in where I want to add in the other floral elements. So I'm going to be adding in some small flowers, which are forget-me-nots, and then some small little red berries as well. And so I do like the spontaneity of the loose painting and kind of just creating it as you go. But I also like to map out a few elements once I've got my main pieces of the painting in. So what I'll do is look at that, and if I like how the composition is, then I will lighten up the pencil with my kneaded eraser and then paint over top. Now I'm coming in with my smaller number 1 size brush and starting on the forget-me-nots, and these are going to be a mix of a light blue and a dark blue, and I like to keep them pretty watery to keep them nice and delicate, but make sure that I do vary the concentration of paint for each petal. And I kind of just go around and make 5 little circle oval shapes next to each other, and I let them bleed into each other and make sure that I leave white space in the middle. And that's because the little forget-me-not flowers are blue, and then they have like a bit of a white center with yellow, and this white space will help us indicate that. And after they're dry, I'll go in and add the little yellow centers with the white still around them. So it's a good way, easy way to make like a tricolor flower. especially when they're so tiny. So I'm just adding those in and adding them in groups of 3. And again, I'm using the paint. I pick up on my brush, rinsing my brush, and then using that dilute remaining amount of paint to make those lighter areas. Now I'm starting on the berries, and these are just some little red berries, very autumn inspired, and they're a darker red with a bit of purple mixed in. And using the same small brush, I'm just adding those in wet on dry, and then I'm just making sure that I just leave a little white space on each one to indicate a little highlight. And so I'm just sort of wet on dry, making the outline, coloring it in, and then leaving one of the little white spaces. And this is where my light little layout drawing is coming in handy. My vase or the jar is nice and dry, so I'm painting over wet on dry with the berry. Moving on to the other section, just doing the same thing. And I'm creating the highlights to be sort of off-center, just with the way that the lighting I'm imagining shining on the bouquet would be. And I've tried my best not to block the camera with my hand there. Definitely challenging at times being left-handed, because I sort of like curl my hand around as I'm painting and writing. It's not ideal. So I'm just finishing up the other cluster of berries. I'm kind of filling in with little filler botanicals where there's a gap in the bouquet and where I want to build out the color and form. You can kind of see the light drawing I have of the berries, and again, you don't have to do a little pencil drawing if you're confident with building it out sort of organically, but I find this really helpful, especially if you're using a darker color like this dark red purple. Like it's pretty hard to see the pencil. So that's why I didn't use any pencil with the Rudibeckia, because they're the yellow. You would definitely see the pencil through those. And now I have a few more forget-me-nots to add in. And I also just decided that I wanted to add in a few more greens. So I'm just drawing a bit of a curved line each place that I want to indicate a bit more greenery, and it'll be kind of like boxwood, little sprigs of tiny leaves that I'll add in. So this is the last little cluster of forget-me-nots. Same thing, I'm going to do 3. I'm going to add in some lighter and darker paint, leaving that white spot in the middle. And it's important that you wait for these to dry until you do the yellow centers, otherwise the yellow will bleed into the blue and sort of take up all the white in the middle, and we want to leave some of that white shining through. So those are my forget-me-nots. Pretty simple, but they look really cute. Look really good in lots of different bouquets and flower arrangements. And now I'm adding in that 4th Rudibeckia leaf. And I'm just going right over the jar. Again, the transparency of watercolor sort of add to this, and it works well. And I'm using that same number 6 brush just to add a little stem in to connect things. And now I've switched back to my smaller number 1 brush, and I'm adding in the yellowy orangey centers of the forget-me-nots. And I'm just dabbing one up there a little bit because it was a little too wet and I wanted it to be a bit softer. And so now I'm starting on the boxwood. You can see that I'm just making, again, little round oval shape leaflets on these stems, some darker, some lighter, again using that same technique of diluting the paint on my brush, dabbing it on a paper towel, and then painting in the other leaves. I sometimes dab it on the paper towel and then re-wet it ever so slightly, and that'll create that nice dilute variation in color concentration. And I'm just adding in another one on the other side. Again, these are all lightly mapped in with pencil, not the leaves, but just the way, the angle and placement of the stem, and then I just sort of freehand in the leaflets after I've done the stem. And I'm adding one up at the top as well. Now I'm going to add in one more sprig of the boxwood just to fill in the gaps and bring things together. And then I'm going to move on to the stems for the berries and the forget-me-not. So first I'm just doing the berries. I'm connecting a stem and kind of tapering them all down together so they'd have like little individual stems connecting to a main stem. And you don't always have to, in the sort of loose floral style, connect everything together, but in this case I am just creating the stem kind of going down through behind the flowers. And I kind of like this single berry just sort of peeking out of the jar. You don't have to do all of them in clusters. And while I've got that green paint, it's a darker green, I'm just adding a center vein onto my Rudibeckia leaves as well. Again, just with really light pressure and dragging down to get a delicate thin line. And then I kind of use a bit of a shaky hand to create the little secondary veins, because none of them are ever perfectly straight if you look really closely. So it looks a little bit more natural that way. You don't have to add them to all of the leaves either. Just a few to indicate some of the detail on the leaves is fine. And so now the bouquet is coming together quite nicely. I have the forget-me-not stems added in as well, and I'm having a look to see what else it might need to finish it off and balance things out. And I think I'm happy with the composition of that for now. And so I'm just lightly penciling in the letters for Hello Fall on the jar. And I have to tell you that I am so not confident with my lettering at all. There's so many talented artists and YouTubers out there with faux calligraphy and hand lettering these days, so I'm trying my best. I blame it a little bit on the fact that I'm left-handed, but I have kind of looked at some other images online. I just googled Hello Fall, and then I saw like a bunch of quotes and faux calligraphy, so I kind of just mimicked some of the images I saw, and now I'm going over it with that darker red that I used for the berries, and I'm using a water brush for this just because I find with lettering you need a more of a consistent wet tip of your brush to keep the pigment flowing. So these are like those brushes you get for outdoor painting, and they've got that reservoir right in the back of the brush. So some people really like to use these for hand lettering, so that's what I'm trying out. And I decided I would just dry what I had so far, again, because left-handed, you go ahead and smudge all your lettering as you write across the page. So if you're left-handed, make sure you dry things halfway. If you're right-handed, that is all the more easier. And again, sorry I'm blocking a bit of the lettering. I'm just following the pencil that I did, and then I am trying to go lighter as I'm pulling up and then push down on the down strokes because that's kind of one of the ideas of faux calligraphy or brush lettering. So you can see that kind of worked out well with the L's on Hello Fall. So I made it through. I didn't ruin the painting. I'm pretty happy with that. And for a while I thought I was finished, so I just left it. I kind of pin things up on my wall when I complete them and look at them for a while, and then later in the evening I looked at some things and thought the jar was a little too pale, and so were the Rudibeckia flowers. So I took a watery mix of that same peachy pink, and wet on dry I just added some more color around the perimeter of the jar and blended it with a clean damp brush. And this just added a little bit more definition, which I thought just was a little bit more complete looking. Then I took a darker yellow mix and just sort of went over some of the petals of the Rudibeckia, and leaving some of the first wash to show through for color definition, and I was just a lot happier with how that looked. And that's everything, so I hope you give it a shot and try the project out, and let me know what you think in the comments down below. And I do also have full-length classes on Skillshare.com. You can check out the link below as well if you're interested in that.